Well, good morning and welcome to Elevenses Live. I'm Kevin Williams and of Survival Skills Rider Training, and it's Sunday the 7th of February. This is Elevenses 111 as it happens, and it's snowing gently outside as I look out the window at the moment. Not settling, but it is actually snowing. So what have we got for you today? Well, I'm back to New Zealand for Shiny Side Up, which is nice news. Unfortunately, it'll be via Zoom rather than in person. Rather sadly, the vigilante pursuit of a stolen car has ended in a rider's death. UK January bike sales have been hammered by lockdown. Shares plunge as Harley revenue drops. There are increasingly hard rumours of an Africa twin-based tourer. We have to ask if Suzuki is still serious about motorcycles. Uncle Tom, Captain Tom's race bike is found in a museum. And I'll finish off with today's better biking tip, which explains the 3 stages of countersteering: push, ease, and relax. So settle yourself down for the next 25-30 minutes or so of topical news, controversial views, and better biking tips. Don't forget, if you can't make it live, you can always catch up here on Facebook, or you can find it over on my YouTube channel at Survival Skills UK. Don't forget that all important UK, or you won't get in. Okay, so right, good morning to Clive, who has said hello. Right, so first things first. Well, many of you probably know that in 2018 and 2019, I was lucky enough to be able to make the trip over to New Zealand to work on behalf of the New Zealand Transport Agency over there as a keynote speaker. Doesn't it sound posh? And the Accident Compensation Corporation over there on their nationwide Shiny Side Up safety initiative. And just to prove it, I'm wearing the t-shirt, as they say. There we go. Now, you'll probably know that I also rated the scheme quite highly because it's an initiative that's led by people who ride motorcycles and delivered to, obviously, the people who ride motorcycles. By contrast, in most safety in the UK is kind of top down, even sort of something like the Bike Safe police-led courses. It's kind of authority figures telling us the right way to do things. Shiny Side Up takes a very different active approach to this, a proactive approach in using motorcyclists who have a message but are talking as equals rather than as sort of authority figures. So I'm very fond of the Shiny Side Up scheme. I'm very pleased to be able to get involved for 2021. So the first presentation will actually be going out in something under a week's time. Be in the middle of the night, of course, for me, but I'm looking forward very much to being part of the Shiny Side Up team once again. I'm just gutted I can't be there for real. Okay, so on with today's stories. Some sad news from Australia. A young Australian motorcyclist who had only recently got her licence was killed last week after she was knocked off her bike when 2 cars collided in Townsville, which is in northeastern Queensland, Australia. Jennifer Board, who was 22, died after she was hit by a vehicle that had just ploughed into another car at an intersection on Friday night. She'd just come back from a group ride with friends when she was involved in this collision. It was a Holden Statesman car, and it was allegedly being driven by a vigilante member of the public in pursuit of another vehicle which was believed to have been stolen. And reports immediately after the crash said that the Holden was being driven aggressively after a Hyundai saloon, and it clipped the back of the Hyundai and then spun out of control, ended up on the wrong side of the road, and collided with Miss Ball's bike, and she died sadly at the scene. The stolen Hyundai fled the scene. The occupants of that haven't yet been found. The car was found abandoned later. The person said to be driving the Holden, a 25-year-old man, and his two passengers, a 41-year-old man and a 22-year-old woman, were taken to hospital and treated for minor injuries, and now being questioned by the police over the incident. More than 100 motorcyclists rode down the street in honour of the 22-year-old woman on Saturday morning, and hundreds of others laid flowers and carried orange balloons to pay their respects at the crash site. Police are appealing for anybody who might have seen the incident to come forward with information. And Superintendent Glenn Ponting said, "I very strongly caution against any form of vigilante action. Oftentimes, while people may have good intentions, it can result in unintended consequences." Well, it certainly did here, very sadly. Right, over here in the UK, the latest sales figures, or I should say more correctly, registration figures for January have appeared, and not surprisingly, they have been hammered by lockdown 3.0, and so the first month's bike sales have pretty much bombed, and that's on the back of what was something of a surprise recovery, perhaps, during the summer of 2020 after the impact of the original lockdown. All categories are down except for one, and that is one. Hang on a minute, they've changed things. Let me just find what I'm looking for. An electric scooter. There we go. We should get that up on screen about now. There it is. It's the Super Socko CPX, and it's the only bike in the list which is actually showing some improvement in sales. Electric scooters, basically, and this particular machine has actually sold fairly well. Okay, it's not selling bucket loads. It's not yet selling at anything like the numbers of the Honda PCX, which might be seen as a sort of competitor, but it is making inroads. Electric bikes are on the way. Why? Well, the scooter basically is a perfect short-range commuter, and it's at an affordable price. Now, the bike comes with a top speed of 55 miles per hour, which means it's adequate for urban use, and will just about keep up with sort of A-road traffic. With the single removable battery it comes with as standard, it gets a range of about 40 miles, which isn't going to get you from London to Leeds or anything like that. But if you're coming in from the suburbs, it's enough to get to work and back again. And you can recharge it from a standard 3-point socket in 7 to 8 hours, and it'll cost you about 45p to do that. So in this format, it's being sold for as little as £3,599, which really isn't a great deal of money. That does include the plug-in vehicle grant, of course. If you want a bit more range, there's an optional second battery for another just over £1,000, and then you double the range up to sort of something over 80 miles. And you can also get a fast charger, which will halve the charging time. So that's the Super Socko electric scooter, which, as I say, is actually doing surprisingly well in the sales charts at the moment. Nick and Tony have both logged in and say hi. On a related note, Harley's shares took a big hit on stock markets during the week when the Milwaukee motorcycle manufacturer announced a drop of 39% in its revenue for the fourth quarter of 2020. And that's down to motorcycle shipments almost halving. Now, you may recall a story earlier, towards the late part of summer last year, that the company was restructuring under a new chief executive. And what that restructuring plan has entailed is basically eliminating slow selling models. And they've also exited markets such as India, where it was claimed that weak sales and low profit margins did not justify the investment. Stocks of bikes have been reduced, promotional offers have been dropped, and what that basically has enabled is dealers to charge list price on new bikes because they have fewer of them to sell. The focus has been turned back towards the high-end machines, traditional markets of the United States and Europe, and basically they're focusing on the older and wealthier customers. The restructuring basically came at the expense of new models, which were almost on the point of release, which might have appealed to younger and new riders. Another change is the update model date has been switched from January to August, and the workforce has also been cut. However, these changes have hit the sales of bikes, and the company itself said that its bike shipments to dealers for 2020 fell 32% to about 1,400. Start again. 145,000 units, and that's one of the lowest levels for Harley since the 1990s. And it's that poor performance that has affected investor confidence. The decline comes at a time when motorcycle sales have gone up on the back of a demand for socially distanced travel and recreational outdoor activity. For example, Polaris last week said that retail sales of its Indian brand in North America were up more than 30% over the same period. So it's not surprising that Harley's shares, which had gained 38% since the July announcement of the sort of restructuring plans, actually fell by around a fifth. So they lost a significant chunk of that gain. Harley themselves have responded with sort of an upbeat explanation of their 5-year plan to increase profits and share returns. And they've again announced that their focus will return to what they call the traditional large capacity touring and cruiser bikes, but they will also augment this by extending themselves into the adventure touring segment, although the whole idea of a Harley powering an adventure bike doesn't seem a particularly logical one to me. They've also launched the Harley Davidson Certified, which is a pre-owned Harley program, which basically copies the model used by car manufacturers, where they basically the used models are checked over and then given a warranty by the manufacturer themselves. And what that's done is it's driven up the cost of used Harleys to nearly that of a new machine. Unlikely as it may seem, e-motorcycles are also deemed important to Harley's future, and they have reaffirmed their commitment to those bikes, declaring that their Livewire e-motorbike is a leader amongst plug-ins worldwide. Well, again, that's another question I suspect is probably one that's open to some debate. Jochen Zeitz, who took over as Harley's chairman, president, and CEO in May, said that Harley Davidson is the most desirable motorcycle brand in the world, backed by leading positions in the most profitable segments and the reinvigorated culture of performance, efficiency, focus, and speed. But that may well be something of an optimistic vision. One US analyst, a chap called Brian Yarborough from Edwards Jones Company, said that basically there was a lot of concern about the lack of demand for Harley products longer term. And he said, they are doing the right thing by trying to correct the supply and demand problem. There's been way too much supply in the market and not enough demand, but I just don't know that shrinking your way to profitability works. The biggest cloud that hangs over Harley is the cloud of aging demographics and younger customers not being interested in their bikes. Whether that is the truth or not is the cloud that hangs over them from the investor standpoint. So, yes, you have to satisfy the investors. And basically, this question has been echoed by potential buyers. There were some comments on one of the articles I found on a US website. And one woman said, I asked where the smaller bikes were because I'm short and I'm more into right-sized engineering than showing off. The boomer-aged sales lady told me they wished they had some so they could have something to sell to the women. So I left. Another rider said, "I honestly believe their products are out of sync with the needs of the 21st century and a world that increasingly has less money to spend on expensive toys." So there you have two different opinions on Harley and their position in the market. Right, okay, Sue, hello there. You're late again due to a reminder failure. Never mind, you nearly got there. Right, okay, so what else? Don't forget, you can always pick up the show. I might as well put the reminder in now. If you head over to my YouTube channel, Survival Skills UK, you can get all these shows in back issue, and you can find them also on my Coffee page, and of course here on Facebook too. Right, so okay, what's going on here in Europe? Well, the latest Euro 5 emissions have killed off quite a significant number of motorcycles from the Japanese manufacturers. Honda are affected. The old V4 powered ST 1300 pan-European is long gone. The VFR 1200F is another casualty, and the VFR 800 is also heading out the door. It's finally bitten the dust on the emissions front, and that basically means that the only touring bike that Honda will have left in its European lineup is going to be the Goldwing, and as people have said, that's probably a step too far for many riders to actively consider. So where do Honda go? Well, the answer is that they appear to be looking at the Africa Twin. The 1100cc parallel twin has recently had an upgrade, you'll probably recall, to meet the Euro 5 emission regs, and that engine is in the off-road sort of adventure bike. It's also appeared in a brand new model coming soon, the CMX 1100 Rebel, which is described by Honda as a bare bones motorcycle that pays homage to the fat-tired bobber. Personally, I think it's hideous, but the point I'm making is that this concept of sharing engines, and sometimes the entire chassis, as in the 700 750 NC series, is what's known as platform engineering. And basically what it allows you to do is build a sort of basic structure of motorcycle, then stick bits on the outside, and you then have different models, and you can produce them relatively quickly and relatively cheaply. And so the latest rumor is that Honda will be bringing a tourer based on that Africa Twin motor, and that's been firmed up by a new European trademark which has just been applied for, and if it's granted, which it is likely to be, it will give Honda the right to use the name NT1100. Now you may remember that the NT650 was the Deauville. The NT was a popular, if uninspiring, bike, but the concept was sort of an affordable touring bike, and so it's likely that the NT1100 will be aimed as a sort of replacement for the ST13 and the VFR 800. The only proviso will be you'll have to like twins. However, that doesn't mean that you won't have some performance. In the Africa Twin format, the motor pumps out 101 horsepower. It's detuned to 86 horsepower in the cruiser, but the 100 horsepower version is the one that's probably going to appear in this forthcoming NT1100. And that's pretty much bang on the money of the old VFR 800. The Twin also makes considerably more torque, 77 pound-feet against 55 pounds-feet, and it does it at lower revs too. So in terms of real road performance, the 1100 Twin motor should actually perform equally or possibly even outperform the much loved VFR. Okay, if you look at the ST13 as a comparison, then the numbers are down, but the ST1300 was a particularly heavy bike. It wasn't exactly the most nimble thing I've ever ridden, and the NT1100 is likely to be considerably slimmer. It's likely you'll get the dual clutched semi-automatic transmission option. It's almost certain, I would have thought, to go on these bikes. When will it appear? Well, that's a good question. But the answer to that is probably no sooner than 2022, although model launches are all over the place thanks to the coronavirus pandemic. With the sort of loss of the big bike shows, there's no longer a real need to build things for the sort of the autumn to be seen at these shows and then launch the following spring. So it could appear pretty much any time. But it's for sure the Honda do have that hole in the range that needs plugging. So I would suggest that it's probably going to appear sooner rather than later. And that leads you to another interesting question. What next? Might we see a V-twin sports version, sort of a more affordable bike than the Fireblade? Okay, so don't forget, what was I going to say next? I was going to put one of those up, wasn't I? If you want some better biking tips, you can head over to my coffee page, and where I have at least, well over 300 articles now available. And I'm also sharing the very latest Facebook Skills on Saturday and Tips on Tuesday series. For example, yesterday's Skills on Saturday article went up on Tips on Tuesday an hour or two later. So if you are not getting all my Facebook posts, my better biking tips, if you log onto the coffee page, you can find those latest articles over there. So that beats the problem with Facebook's algorithms, which determine what you see and what you don't see. Okay, so next question. Looking at Honda's rather astute use of the platform that I've just been talking about, the question I kind of have to ask is Suzuki still serious about motorcycles? Now, judging by their sales figures from January, the answer is probably no. In the first month of this year, they didn't even feature in the top 10 of the sales chart, distorted though it was by lockdown. Yeah, okay, you can say that the current problems across the world are distorting things, but when they actually fail to outsell the likes of Sim and Kiwi, I think Suzuki have something of a problem. Maybe they will surprise us with a rush of new Euro 5 models. My guess is probably not. And I wouldn't be entirely surprised to see Suzuki become the first of the big four Japanese manufacturers to actually pull the plug on two-wheelers altogether. Right, okay, what's next? Well, we probably all know about Captain Sir Tom Moore's back garden walking exploits, which raised 32 million for the NHS charities. But what's rather less well known is that the 100-year-old war veteran, who sadly passed away earlier this month, was also a competitive motorcycle racer in the 1920s. And this bike, on which he won trophies, has recently been revealed as being in a museum near his old hometown of Keighley. So that's Captain Tom there, sitting astride the machine. It's a Scott Flying Squirrel, dates, as I say, from the 1920s, and he's clutching there a selection of trophies that he had won racing that machine. The bike itself was apparently bought and rebuilt in the 1950s by a chap called Charles Wood, known as C.H. Wood, who was a well-known commercial photographer in the city. And he himself was a retired motorcycle champion, I gather. Mr. Wood's son, David, is the current owner of the bike, and it's on long-term loan to the Bradford Industrial Museum, which is where the photo was provided from. So if we ever get out of lockdown, there is a bike that may be worth a visit to go and see. On the aspect of photographs of motorcycles, I keep posting up pictures of customized bikes that I think are perfectly hideous. So here's one that I rather do like. I can't see the back end of it, and that's the only bit of the bike I can see, so I can't tell you much about it, and I have no information about it whatsoever. I can't tell you whether that is a CX500 or a CX650 engine. Although I think with the black lining on the motor there, somebody will probably correct me if I'm wrong. I think it may be the 650. But to me, those lines just look right. I mean, the engine is quite a big lump, but it just fits the front of the machine there. Having owned a CX500, I've always thought that if Honda had actually focused on updating that V-twin, they would have been onto a long-term winner. The short-lived 650 put out a pretty healthy 70-odd horsepower, which is much the same as the long-running SV650 from Suzuki, one of the few bikes they do still make. And I suspect with modern design techniques, they could have not only shed quite a few kilos from the bike itself, but they could have updated the handling as well. It was never, I wouldn't say the handling on the CX was bad, but it certainly could have been improved over the years, I think. The motor itself was doddle to service. I could do an entire full service on it in 40 minutes. It was also a reliable and long-lived bike, and you only had to see the number of couriers who were using them, and there were still couriers riding these bikes into the early 2020s when they were getting on for 20 years old. And of course, we just talked about Honda's use of platform, so it's hard to see why it couldn't have actually ended up powering a range of bikes. But if there was a modern CX, I really would look at it fairly closely, not least because it had a shaft. Right, okay, so on to today's better biking tip. I'm going to explain the 3 stages of counter steering. The explanation for this is taken from my survival skills paperback, which you can source from my publisher, and I'll put the URL up for you there. Do keep an eye open for publisher discounts. There isn't one at the moment, but they usually put them up every couple of weeks. I'll let you know when the next one is. So, all right, what is counter steering? Well, the basic concept of counter steering was first described by one of the Wright brothers. And yes, I do mean the Wright brothers who built aeroplanes. And they wrote about it in the very first days of the 20th century in a scientific paper in an engineering journal. Yet here we are 100 years on. And the weird and wacky ideas and continuing debate about steering make it seem like a mystic art rather than something that you can actually describe with some mathematical equations. Part of the problem here in the UK is that the DVSA have always been reluctant to have instructors covering steering technique as part of the training syllabuses. Astonishing though it may seem, it's still not directly covered in CBT. It's not recommended, or certainly wasn't, for post-test training, although I did have a little dialogue with a couple of instructors who say they include it. Post-CBT, it's always been a bit hit and miss as well, whether it's covered during training. And most importantly, even at post-test level, the information isn't always correct. For example, counter steering only appeared in the edition of Roadcraft, get the prop, the one that came out before this one. So that's the very latest Roadcraft, and it's still not entirely correctly covered in here, which is fairly astonishing, really. So if riders haven't got a particularly clear idea how they steer a motorcycle, it's not surprising that some of them struggle to get around corners. As I say, even experienced riders will struggle to get around bends or take avoiding action in an emergency. But worse, what happens is they end up spreading faulty information to other motorcyclists. I still hear it. I heard it just recently that counter steering is a track technique. Another person said it's only for sports bikes. You don't counter steer cruisers. One very experienced DAS instructor told me face to face, quite seriously, that you can't counter steer a cruiser because you can't push the bars down. Well, okay, we'll talk about that in just a moment. And some years ago, I was consulted by a former police instructor because I seem to know a lot about counter steering, he said. and he admitted that he'd never been taught the technique or taught it to his trainees. I gave him a brief explanation. He promised to try it and rang back the next day. "It works, doesn't it?" was his quite surprised response. And to complicate matters even further, some trainers have decided that counter steering is too confusing a term, so they've invented alternatives. Some Americans call it push steering. Keith Code, being different as usual, decided that he would call it positive steering. And thanks to a demonstration from the UK branch of the Superbike School some years back, the DVSA also decided to adopt the terminology of positive steering. My first thought when I read that was, what's negative steering? Some think we should just call it steering. But the problem is that when expert riders lack an understanding, when different bodies use all these different terms, it's no wonder that average riders hold some really weird ideas. I'm going to stick to counter steering. I always have done, and I did try to demystify it on my training courses. And put it quite simply, the rider has to move the handlebars to move the front wheel. And the basic rule is, if you want to turn right, you push the right handlebar away from you. If you want to turn left, you push the left handlebar away from you so that the front wheel points in what appears to be the wrong direction. That's why it's called counter steering. Okay, now the idea that you would actually want to turn the wheel to point the wrong way to get the bike to steer sounds unlikely, but it does actually work. And we all use counter steering. Even those riders who insist they only use it on specific types of corner, you all counter steer. You do it on every single corner, whether you realize it or not. The first point to make is that the bar has to be pushed forwards and not down. And that's basically because of the way the steering rotates. If you push down on that handlebar, absolutely nothing happens. The steering rotates around the axis of the steering stem, so it has to be pushed to the front or pulled to the rear, either or. What happens? Well, basically, mass always wants to go in a straight line, thanks to momentum. So when you steer the front wheel out to the right, we'll do it that way. We want to turn right, so we'll push left. Start again. I've just confused myself here. Let's push the right handlebar to turn the wheel to the left because we want to turn right. What happens is the front wheel actually does steer the motorcycle out. So we push the right handlebar, the front wheel points to the left, and the front wheel actually pulls the bike out like that. So it starts to topple, but it topples to the right, even though because that front wheel's pointing left. And that is what starts the lean. And what happens next is the wheel comes in to swing into the corner. Let's try and get that actually on the screen. And now you have the wheels lined up to roll the bike around the turn. So that is effectively how counter steering works. It's the bike sort of basically trips up over its own front wheel. That's enough we really all need to know is push right, go right, push left, go left. But that explains incidentally how it is that riders who claim they don't counter steer but lean into corners get round corners. They're actually unwittingly, when they lean into the turn, they are actually putting pressure on the handlebar on the inside. So they are counter steering whether they realize it or not. Okay, the full effects are actually a bit more subtle than that. The bike self-centers, it straightens itself up. Take your hands off a motorcycle and it will go in a straight line. It's designed to compensate for the front tire being deflected by bumps and gusts of wind. Now, if you're in a corner and you take your hands off the bars, you're leant over, the bars are at an angle, you take your hands off the bars, and what happens is you'll see the bars will swing slightly and the bike will actually sit upright again. Why that happens? Well, it's because of the drag on the tire by the road. It's that self-centering force happening. The bike rolls itself upright. So we actually don't steer bikes upright to come out of corners. We initiate the lean by counter steering, but when we get to the end of the corner, we actually take the pressure away on the counter steering and let the bike roll itself upright. So there's a middle bit then where we're actually maintaining the lean. We've pushed initially to get the bike to the lean angle we want. Then we ease off some of the pressure, but not all of it, and we let the bars swing so that the wheel turns into the direction we want to go. And then that maintains the lean and it maintains the radius of the turn. But when we get to the end of the corner, we take all the pressure off the handlebar, the bike rolls itself upright, and we straighten up again. So there are basically 3 bits to counter steering: that initial push to get the bike to steer, a relaxed pressure as we ease off to get the bike to come upright, and then we take all the pressure away completely and let the bike steer itself upright. There are 2 other things to remember. We can change the rate of roll, that is to say how fast the bike gets from there to there, by changing the amount of pressure we put on the handlebar. If we push the bar very gently, it takes a long time for the bike to roll over. If we push the bar more vigorously, the bike gets to our chosen lean angle more quickly. And once we do that, we'll change direction faster. And that's what's known as quick steering. Secondly, the longer we keep pushing, the greater the lean angle that the bike will actually achieve. And finally, the radius of the turn depends on the combination of speed and lean angle. So for any given speed, the faster, the more we lean the bike, the tighter the machine will turn. Similarly, if we're on a fixed radius of turn and we speed up, the bike must run wide on that corner because we are adding extra speed. Okay, so as I say, given the sort of Chinese whispers and the lack of official guidance, it's hardly surprising that many riders aren't actually fully sort of understanding countersteering. One of my favourite expressions is countersteering overcomplicates riding. I don't see how. Call me overcomplicated, but I like to know how I want to get around a corner. It's a pretty useful collision avoidance technique too. So countersteering basically is controlled steering. It puts us in charge of the machine. We all do it, but if we know how we're doing it, it makes life a damn sight easier. Right, anybody? I've got a few comments there. I see. All right, okay. Right. So that's the end of today's show. A couple of extra points. Don't forget, I've already mentioned it. The coffee page now has the Facebook Saturday Skills on Saturday and Tips on Tuesday pages available to read. Don't forget, Coffee 2 is probably the biggest and best value rider skills resource on the internet. The latest 60-second safety video has gone up on YouTube, and you can find it over there on my YouTube channel. And there's also the new newsletter, which will help you keep track of all my Facebook posts, and they'll just be basically delivered to your email inbox, and then you can follow the link to it. Last but not least, I may be locked down, but I'm not shut down. I am still delivering online coaching sessions for individuals for just £20 an hour. That includes on countersteering. I'm also available to deliver presentations to groups and clubs. I've delivered 2 this week, so drop me a line if you're interested. I've got another one lined up for a couple of months' time. And of course, if you want to catch up with the old shows, head over to Coffee. All right, that's it. A bit longer than usual this morning. I shall go away and now drink my cup of tea and get my voice back. So once again, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you with the next show at 11 on Wednesday. Bye.